how did you get started and why did you get started in this environment?
I've always been, my kids used to call me the counselor. They bring all their friends over to talk to me. Excuse me. I've always been a helper. And I remember being 6 or 7 years old and I was swinging on the swings and like having these really deep reflective thoughts that you probably shouldn't have, or most kids don't have. And I'm like, I was made for big things and I'm going to do big things. And as my life progressed, I was in a household where there was a lot of codependence. And I had learned that I was taught that love was not freely given, but it was to be earned. And so what I did was I ended up wanting to get out of my household. I got married very young to someone who I didn't know enough about. Obviously, he was young too. And he had an alcohol problem and drugs, and I thought I'd fix them because I'm fix the world is who I am. And so I ended up in really a domestic violence marriage for 11 years with that man. And I didn't heal after that marriage. And so as I continued through my life, I kept this pattern of, to be loved, you have to do things. You have to make people happy. You have to go out there and be their emotional support, and there's no time for you. In fact, I didn't even look at what my needs were because I was so busy making sure everybody else was good and having children so young. My whole identity was in what kind of a mom am I, what kind of a wife am I. It was never about who am I as a person. And I love the name of your show being Behind the Shades. We were talking about who am I as a person. I never really gave it any thought. All my hopes and dreams I thought will be next time, maybe next lifetime. And so I progressively stayed in these relationships until finally I was 45 years old. And I'm like, what the hell? I remember saying, why can't someone just love me the way that I am? Why can't someone just accept me as I am? And that was that epiphany moment where I finally, first time ever in my life, hadn't been in a relationship from 18 to 45 years old. I was in a relationship. And I remember sitting on the bed, started the journaling, started that whole journey, boohooing. And I have an Aussie and a Chihuahua, and they're just looking at me. They're by my side. And the look of unconditional love they had just, it overwhelmed me. And I remember the epiphany moment of going, why don't I love myself like that? That's what's missing, because I'm the constant in all of this chaos. And that was when everything for me started. And I decided, that's why I always say decided, because it doesn't just happen. I had to take action to say, I'm deciding to do things differently than I've ever done for 45 years of my life. And I decided I had worth. I decided I would go out there and figure out who I am as a person and what value I bring to this world.
There's a time where in my life I was hearing similar stories and I didn't quite understand it because you begin to ask yourself, if you're in that situation, would you do the same thing? And the answer for many things is no, until you get into that situation. And then it's
Yeah.
totally different because sometimes you're not thinking rationally, right? It's just he makes me feel this way, she makes me feel this way, and I feel so good. You tend to forget some of the red flags or you start to ignore them. And I think for a lot of women, they have a hard time dealing with this is because they're so inclined to nurture, to want to repair someone, right? It's like hardwired into them. And then there's the whole thing about their being agreeable and just going along with the flow. And you can get caught up so quickly, so easily, especially when you're young, impressionable, and to a degree not as experienced as you are now. The 18-year-old Maureen is definitely not the 45-year-old Maureen, right? Like, have you ever looked back and thought, I'm definitely not repeating that at this age ever again?
That's funny because people always ask you, what would you tell your younger self? And my whole goal is to be the voice that my younger self needed for others who are in that situation. And, it's interesting because finally, my journey has come full circle to where I can actually look back at some of those things that I did with gratitude. Because how could I be sitting here in front of you talking about this if I didn't experience it? So I tell a lot of my clients and friends, you can't experience joy unless you've discovered sadness. You can't have happiness until you've been sad. So it's really this full circle of, would I do it different? Everybody says, I don't have any regrets. Don't lie. You've had regrets. But what I would say is to shorten the time of the suffering. So you knew you were suffering. And for me, I just continued it and continued it and continued it, even though I knew I'm doing the same thing and expecting different results. Insanity cycle. Or I'm dating a different guy, a different face, but it's the same guy, because I didn't change internally the decision to set my bar higher. And you're right, women, this is a really catch 22 for women, is we love to be needed. We love to be needed. And at times, if you don't love yourself first, you're going to really attract those people who need you the most. And there's people who hone in on those women that are nurturers and caretakers. I have something as a relationship coach that I always sort of tell people how to decipher your relationships. And these are the main ones. So we always think about relationships as romantic, but it's all relationships in your life. So for instance, your self relationship is healthiest when your desire to be your authentic self is greater than the need to please or receive approval from others. And that was a struggle for me, because I grew up in a household where you needed approval. We were criticized highly, and I was always trying to prove myself. This one for your dating or your marriage or your long-term relationships is when your desire for your soul compatibility is stronger than your fear of being alone. That's when you're at your healthiest romantic relationship. Family and marriage, when your desire for the deepest connection that mutually serves each person is stronger than the fear of abandonment, which is a biggie for a lot of us. We just don't want to be alone. I'll take anybody. I don't want to be alone. And then the last one is community, the world, or life's purpose. When your desire to accomplish fulfillment in your life and give to the people and places around you is greater than the fear of judgment. That's when you have your healthiest relationships.